Let's discuss air hunger again. So it'll be follow on from my previous video on air hunger, and that itself was a follow on from a breathing exercise video I did, and I'll link to both of those below. The reason for this one is I had a couple of questions on those videos relating to air hunger, and I felt the answer to type into YouTube comments was going to be a bit long. I figured it'd actually be better to just address it in person by doing a video. So one of the main concerns it appears to be is the idea of doing a long out breath is a cause for alarm in itself if you have air hunger. So doing the long out breath invokes anxiety, and it's how to get around that. I'm not saying it's possible to entirely get around it. You might be able to minimize it to still get benefits from the exercise. And one person asked me how long it would take to overcome their air hunger and their anxiety through these exercises. And that's very much how long's a piece of string, because you don't know, I don't know, and how long how long someone's been having these issues for, and how ingrained they are, and how severe or acute they are. So it's not really a question I can answer in length of time, but I wouldn't ask that question of yourself anyway. I think it's an unfair burden to put on yourself to put a timeline on it. As long as you're making, even if it's baby steps in the right direction, say over the course of a year or maybe 2 years, as long as you get there in the end, it kind of doesn't matter. And the exercises aren't particularly onerous anyway. It's not a major chore. And there are often things you can do just, while doing other things casually. So some people have pointed out that the moment they start breathing out, the anxiety starts. They want an in-breath. And I thought I would address that by pointing out that your lungs don't actually collapse. So as you breathe out, the rib cage comes in and the diaphragm reduces, but they don't go like that. So there's always air in your lungs. Now, at the end of an extended out breath, if you breathe out all the air you possibly can, you still have more than 50% of your full lung capacity available. Just take that little academic information and try to really let that settle in to be an emotional belief that even at all the way out, you can't blow out any more air, there's still more than 50% of your full lung capacity available to you. And that's a lot. And you have time. So obviously as air comes in, the job of the lungs is to extract the oxygen out of it, and that takes time, and possibly more time than you'd think. Now, at the end of a normal out breath, and I don't actually have figures for this, let's just say, at the end of a normal out breath, you've got 60% of your full lung capacity left. It might be more, but let's just say 60%, why not? So in casual breathing and conversation, because one commenter did say that they felt awkward, even halfway through a sentence. That even if you got to the end of that sentence, if you weren't overdoing it, you still got, say, 60% of your lung capacity available. That's a lot. Knowing you have that availability, you really need to know that's there for you, and that you haven't actually breathed out all your air at all. So you can't actually breathe out all your air. It's just not physically possible because the lungs don't collapse. It's not like a balloon where you can get the surfaces together. So there's always air in there. And you need to spend some time thinking about that, actually. Now, another aspect of that is the time it takes for the air to get used up. Now, an add-on to the breathing exercise I gave initially, I can't actually remember if I put it in that first video or not. I'm going to re-mention it now anyway. Is at the end of the extended out breath, I often say pause for a second or two to feel the tension it takes to keep the air out, and then release the tension and just let the in-breath come naturally. And what I sometimes suggest to clients is to actually hold that out breath indefinitely. And I usually mention this to encourage greater movement. So what happens is as you hold the breath out, in time, the oxygen within your lungs is getting used up and absorbed into the bloodstream. And there's a part of your brain that monitors that. And if the blood oxygen levels go down too low, there's you get a little mental tap on your shoulder that says, that's enough, I want more air. But that can take longer than you think. Now, because the blood oxygen levels have gone down a little bit, and that's why you're getting that sort of mental warning sign, the subsequent in-breath will naturally be bigger without you having to do anything. So it could be a nice way to really get the torso moving. Not just the rib cage, but the spine, because the rib cage articulates the spine. You actually get a nice little wiggle that goes along the spine with the breath. And by exaggerating that movement, by holding on to the out-breath for a while, it's an easier way to make those observations and to really let go into movement there. But it occurs to me that this thought could be used for air hunger as well. I mean, it might take a while to get there, but to observe how long it takes for that nagging feeling to appear. Now, initially the nagging appears, halfway through a breath. Well, you need to get to the point where you can do a full out breath without that nagging feeling, because actually there's loads of air. Now, here's an example. I haven't prepared for this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to breathe out all the air I can and wait. And we'll see how long it takes for that little nag in my brain that says, I think that's enough. I think you should release and let air come back in. And I'll gesticulate with my hands or something when I let the air come back in. So I'll breathe out all the air I can. That was longer than I expected, to be honest. It's actually quite relaxing in a way. As you can see, that's quite a long time. I held my breath out at the extension of my out breath. So I couldn't breathe out any more air. That was the extent of my out breath, an extended out breath. There was still more than 50% of my lung capacity in there. And the air that was in there, that took that long for enough oxygen to be used up for that part of my brain that monitors that goes, it's getting too low. You ought to release and let air come back in. Now, bear in mind, I'm sat here still. If I was walking or doing anything, that would be used up much, much quicker. But I think you'll agree that was a long time. As you watched me do that, I didn't look uncomfortable in any way. That's a long time. Take that on board. That there's this 50%, well over 50% of lung capacity sat there just still working without you doing anything. Now, the air in your lungs actually is the same volume of air in many ways as the air around you. Obviously, as I held my breath out and I had my mouth closed, I'd actually created a separate volume. But while the tubes are open, all that air is one volume of air from the outside and the inside until I close it, anything like my mouth or my trachea. It's one volume of air. So what happens is when you breathe back in, you don't actually suck air in. You never want to suck air in, and you can't suck it in as such because that's not physically what's happening. And that's obviously something that people who have air hunger have a desire to do, to suck the air in. What actually happens is as the ribcage expands again, you're creating volume in the lungs, greater volume. And as the greater the volume, the lower the air pressure. And because the air pressure is going down, the outside, well, I say outside, the surrounding air pressure can sense there's a region of lower air pressure, which happens to be in your lungs, and it's a pressure gradient, and it wants to equalize it. So as you breathe in, what's actually happening is the outside air, this air, pushes its way in. You don't suck it in, it forces its way in. So an in-breath is really the room around you breathing into you, or the space around if you're outside, wherever. So you do then give the breath back with an out-breath. So an in-breath is the room breathes into you, and the out-breath is you give it back. And there's this unity between yourself and your environment of moving air around. and you're just part of that environment. I think with air hunger, you kind of feel like you're not part of that environment. There's some sort of exclusion between you and your environment. But all our functionality, whether it's breathing or whether it's standing, running, or whatever, is all done in relation to our environment. It's like a fish in water. Our environment provides all the support we require for functioning. Our functioning is predicated on there being an environment to provide these things. So we kind of want to look to the external in a way to find our functioning, not internal. And I say external because that's the colloquial way of saying it, but really one could argue, is there an internal and external? It's all one system. Our being and our functioning is a unity of self and environment. And we want to forget the fact that there's a self and environment in some ways. It's a singular entity, self and environment. You can't have functioning without it. Functioning is a self-environment unity, as is being. I mean, I sometimes use the word being, sometimes use the word functioning, depending on the nature of the conversation at the time. But yeah, see if you can find better support there by understanding your relationship with the air pressure around you, and understanding that there's always this big old balloon full of air, always, even at the extended part of your out breath, still doing oxygenation. It's still taking oxygen from the air, and that takes a while. So you can have a go at that. First, just see if you can get to the end of a natural out breath without worrying, just knowing that there's loads of air in there, and it takes time. Look how long it took me with an extended out breath. Then maybe you could do a full extended out breath. Just remind yourself over and over again, there's loads of air, there's loads of air, there's loads of air. And then finally, you might be able to start pausing a bit longer and a bit longer and a bit longer. Now, one of the things that's going to happen is if you have air hunger, you're bound to feel anxious about performing any of these exercises. And one of the things we say in the Alexander technique is to look out for the clues and cues in body behavior, or self-behaviour, and negate them if you can. And one of the things we do when we're anxious is, the shoulders go up. If I exaggerate, the shoulders go up and we pull on our neck and we're all a bit, Now, it doesn't have to be that big, but you'll feel this pull on the neck. Now, what we find is, because a theme within the Alexander technique is that we're psychophysical, there's a psychophysical unity, that actually the mind and the body are a singular functional entity within itself, although I'm arguing further that there's self-environment unity beyond that as a functionality. But within normal Alexander canon, if you like, we think of the mind-body as a singular entity. And I've lost my train of thought there. I apologise. So when we feel anxious, it displays in body behaviours, and pulling on the neck's one of them. So what we like to suggest, and what we find, is if we negate some of the physicality, some of the emotional aspect gets negated with it. And the classic one is, because we're pulling here, and it's a classic refrain in the Alexander technique to let your neck be free, to let your head go forward and up. Now, this forward and up is up, you want to release upwards, and the forward is a rotation forward over the atlanto-occipital joint. So in gravity, our head naturally wants to roll forward over this joint, because that joint is ever so slightly to the rear. So that's the balance point. It just sits there quite happily. And what we tend to do is, it's part of the startle reflex. It's just one of the physiological things with us, is we interfere with that, with our emotions and our reactions. We start to pull a bit. So while you do these exercises, these long out breaths, you want to keep reminding yourself to send the back of your head up into length. So you get this nice length up the back of the neck and the upper back. So always releasing upwards. So, we always say think up in the Alexander technique, and let the neck be free to let the head go forward and up. Forward, rotation, forward, up, up. So this is our natural balance point. So while you're doing the exercise, you want to remind yourself that's the intention, that's your wish and your direction for coordination, to maintain that all the time. You're always releasing forward and up. Let that almost be your primary consideration to release forward and up. And it's not a doing, you don't sort of force it. It's a reminder not to pull back and down, you know, back and down and shoulders going up. It's a reminder not to do that. So it's not a doing, it's a not doing. It's a reminder of what not to do. So you leave that alone. Let that be primary in your thought while you do the long out breaths. Negate the physicality of anxiety. So I hope that answers the questions people asked me. If you've got any more, obviously just reply in the comments. And should you be interested in personal Alexander lessons, you know where to get me. It's all right. Take care. Bye.